Hello and welcome to Leadership Pathway. It is great to have you. My name is Dave Miller, and I'll just give a moment here. See a bunch of people coming into the room. I'll just give a moment. If you're watching this live, and it looks like a lot of you are, it's amazing. As we go through our time together, you're welcome to drop a message or a question in the chat window on our topic of the 7 ingredients that must be present for leadership development to be happening. And before we start, I always love to give a shout out to Norton Creative, nortoncreative.net. I'll drop that in the show notes later. Jonathan Norton makes all of this possible. He chases this stuff down. He designs the landing pages and make sure that everything looks great. I always say whatever is on our website that is spelled correctly and looks good came from Jonathan, and the other stuff that's all messed up, I did. I was in Salt Lake City this week and told 3 different churches that all needed websites about Jonathan. And then flying home last night was texting with a leader from Cincinnati who, it's a turnaround church, and he's got 3 other staff people, and he's looking for a couple. And I said, hey, here's, I sent that to a prospective candidate. And I told him, I told the candidate, don't judge this church by the website. But just here's that church. I'm like, bro, you need to work on the curb appeal when you're thinking about launching a residency and recruiting residents or recruiting other staff. And, so Jonathan Norton thinks like a church guy, is a church guy, grew up a pastor's kid, and he's fast and he's cost effective. And so when it comes to websites and social strategy and media and stuff, I can't say enough good. I think I tell someone about him and his people about every week. So Norton Creative. If you are watching live a week from yesterday, next week is Recruiter's Edge out in Salt Lake this week. I was with one of our partner churches, and he said, we used the stuff that we signed up with you guys and launched a residency last year, went through Recruiter's Edge training on how to recruit. He goes, we used that exact plan. We're stuck looking for a full-time worship pastor. And we used that exact plan, the things that we learned in that workshop. We used it and found a worship leader. And he goes, I've been telling everybody, whether you do a residency or not, you ought to take that class. And in the spirit of November and the holidays, it's on sale. So I'll drop that in the show notes later. It's on sale for this month. Nobody pays full price for anything, do they? But anyway, it's on sale this month. We'd love to have you at Recruiter's Edge. We talk about how the top of the funnel appears to be as live and as noisy as ever in this country. And it's amazing with all of the tools that we have, social, Indeed.com, all of the job boards, all of the things. But what's going to give you an edge? And how can you think like candidates are thinking? And so this is based on the last almost decade now of recruiting people to work at churches, whether they're an intern or a top level leader. I think you're going to walk away with something that's going to help. Okay. That's a week from next Wednesday. And I'll send you the link to that. And then also, since Black Friday's coming, I thought, well, for those people, we had more people register for this webinar today than any of these that we've ever done. We've done these for 3 years, I think now. And so I can tell this topic is hot. And you're passionate about it. Thank you. I'm passionate about this topic. It's why we do Leadership Pathway in the first place, is what we're going to talk about today. And so if you go to our website today and you sign up for the masterclass, I'll give you $1,000 off the price. And that'll get you at least the Southwest airline ticket to Cincinnati for the masterclass the last week of February. It's 2 days, deep dive. It's intense. It's all day. It's 9 to 5. And it's really hard to pay attention from 2 to 5, but that's what we do. We get everything done. We try to help leaders leave this teaching equipped and ready to go home and launch a residency. And whether you need us or not, our prayer is you go back to your place, or if you're already doing internships and you just want to elevate what you're doing, or you've been doing residency for a decade. We have people that come to this as just a refresher or a different look at how to do this and how to learn how to coach I think you're going to learn some stuff, and you're going to go home with some new friends, hopefully, not just us, but the other leaders. They're exhausting to do for us, but we did 5 last year, one this past season in 24. We did one in 23. Almost about 100 leaders have gone through this, and it's good vibes. That's all I can say. It's good. It's great stuff. And if I can motivate you to get there, the last week of February in Cincinnati, or as they call Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati. It's Cincinnati area, and it's beautiful in February. It's gray. You're going to love it. So we had some Floridians fly up this past year, and they were shocked at how cold it was. But anyway, that's just today. Sign up. You don't have to pay today, but I'll see the email pop in. If you sign up today, $1,000 off. That'll get you the flight, maybe the hotel, a couple of nights, and we buy you dinner on Tuesday, provide lunch. It's a great event. It really is. Okay. What else? I always start, if you've attended these before, I always start with a surprise question. When I normally am hosting, doing the one asking the questions. And I always ask our guests, what are we doing between the ages of 18 and 25? Because I'm always interested. That's the age group that we work with, 20 to 25-year-olds. And I'm always interested in what people are doing. And so as my wife was leaving, I got home last night from the airport. She was leaving to go to Nashville this morning. She's like, who's hosting the webinar today? And I'm like, me. She's like, you're on there by yourself? I'm like, yeah, I've never done this before. She had this look of panic and shock, like maybe you could get someone to host. So anyway, I need to ask myself the question, what were you doing between the ages? So I thought I would start by answering that question, even though it's not a surprise to me, but we'll act like it is. When I was 18, I graduated from high school. I knew I wanted to do something for God. I didn't know what. I grew up in a great church, but like most of my friends who've known me a lot, I mean, I've been faking stomach aches and still do to get out of going to church. So I didn't know that I wanted to be a church leader. And I remember, I think it was my mom said to me, well, go to the college that your brother went to. Try it just for a year, which is a terrible way. Don't do that to your kids. It's a terrible way to pick a college. But I went to a Christian college in Cincinnati, which is now closed. And I went for a year, and then I had friends, and I went back, and I was like a lot of college seniors, maybe not in that day, but certainly like all of them today. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, I knew I wanted to do something for God. I knew I didn't want it to be a standard traditional sort of thing, and answered the call. And by call, I mean, it was a guy named Mike Bro backstage at a thing called Christ in Youth, which is now this massive 60 or 70,000 high school kids going through this every summer. Back then, there were 3 or 4 events. I played in the band, and every Monday night, I think 4 or 5 weeks that summer, he was backstage. He was the Monday night speaker and challenged me to go to his church in a small town in Kentucky and be an intern, which I did. And then he left to go plant an amazing church now in Las Vegas. And there I was, completely, what would we say, out over my skis, clueless of what I was doing. He was only there a couple of months before he left to plant the church. And I thought I was going to go be the guy that planned the services so Mike could lead the services. And that's not what happened. I was leading the services, having never been on a microphone. I had always been the guy back in the band. And this is interesting to me because this week in Salt Lake, I met a resident of ours, Gracie, and she has the best office I've ever seen for a resident. Shout out to Southeast Church there. But, who she thought was going to be mentoring her is not there. They got transferred out of town. And there were other things going on in the church. The plans changed, the best laid plans. It took us over 6 months to find her and get her there. She moved out from Missouri. And I looked at her and I thought, yeah, this is awesome. This is great because we have this amazing plan of what we thought was going to happen. And now we are changing that plan. We are following. Evidently, God's got a different idea than we did. That was my that was my deal. Now, there are people, a couple still in my life today, Andy Fry, Saul Reyes, Bart Rendell, Greg Chandler, Glenn Schneiders, Brian Carter. There was this small group of people that I hung out with, and on the given week, for those 3 years I was on staff in Kentucky, they didn't let me quit, or they let me steal things from them, or they kicked me when I needed it. We would not have called it a residency, and we would not have called it coaching back in those days. But that's who those guys were to me. And that's why I'm, whatever you're transformed by in that age 18 to 25, you're going to be passionate about someday, and God's going to use in your life. So you can look at Leadership Pathway today, some 30 years later, and a lot of it comes right out of that formative time of my life where it wasn't one person coaching me. It was a group of people, because I probably would have worn any one of those people out with my questions and my complaints and my whining about my job and what I was doing. So that's what I was doing between the age 18 and 25. I didn't have much of a plan. I certainly did not predict where it was going to lead within a decade, being in Las Vegas and having my life change forever. But that's what I was doing between 18 and 25. And that's why I'm passionate about today's topic, okay? I'll drop in the show notes later. You'll get an email, and it'll have some blog posts that I'm going to reference today. I've talked about these 7 things off and on. I would say this is a decade in the making, this list. We've tweaked it and changed it over the years and added to it. But I believe there are seven ingredients. There are 7 things that have to be present for leadership development to be happening in young 20-somethings, in Generation Z, as we call it. Now, you'll read a lot. There's a lot written about how Gen Z, they have to have mission and community. Those are the 2 things Gen Z is looking for. And I want to address that up front, that mission and community, I believe, is embedded in all 7 of these things. It has to be present. It's sort of like the oxygen. It's the oxygen that's going to move this forward in their life as you are trying to coach and lead and mentor them. So it's the given to me. It is the given that if you cannot provide a strong mission, if you cannot tie what a young Gen Z leader is doing at their desk or in the halls or in the big room or with the kids or in the parking lot, if you cannot tie that to your mission and also provide them a way to make friends, know and be known, so to speak. If you can't do that, then you probably should close your church, first of all. But you definitely, you got to load that in first. Sort of like the person that's building John Deere tractors. Are they putting nuts on bolts, or are they feeding the world? It's the mission. So are we parking cars? Are we leading a parking team, or are we making disciples who make disciples and transform the valley for Jesus? Whatever your mission statement is, right? Are we working in preschool this morning, or are we providing a place where people can grow to full devotion in Jesus? So you have to attach the job to the mission. I don't think any of you are going to struggle with that if you're employed at a church. In fact, we overdo it sometimes. It's about our mission and vision, and we forget the metrics and the steps to get there. So attach it to mission and then provide community. Now, this gets tricky, especially in a smaller church where maybe there aren't young adults present. There is not a strong ministry of 20-somethings at your church. And this would be very, very normal. You shouldn't feel bad about that. It's hard to do, but you have to provide community somehow. Sometimes across town on a Thursday night or a Wednesday night is an amazing young adult ministry. And we go find these things and we help residents get connected over there at a different church. Go to worship, jump in a group, make friends. You're working over at this church, but maybe you have to find your community elsewhere. It's tricky. You have to be careful in those situations, but you have to do mission and community throughout all 7. Okay, number 1, if you're writing down, if you're taking notes, number 1 is the easiest. It is the easiest of all 7. And it's the one we love. And it's education. You might call it training, education, training, smart things. Okay. We're very good at it in America, actually. We have a couple hundred years of doing colleges and seminaries, and we're really good at content. If you think about it, it makes total sense why your church would nail this one, because most churches, 52 Sundays a year, somebody's up front talking, right? They're talking. It's about 30 minutes long. It probably has 3 or 4 points. There might even be fill in the blanks to follow along with, supported by scripture with a great close. It's called a sermon. It's primarily, it's inspirational training, isn't it? If you think about it. And then Wednesday nights, the youth pastor has got a subset of people. They're in high school and middle school, and he's training them. He's preaching, she's preaching to them, but it's training. And sure enough, there's also 3 or 4 points for the youth group. We're really good at training. We're really good at content, small group resources. ChatGPT will write them for you today based on the message. We are good at education and instructing the mind. And that's why it's the easiest one to do for us. Also, every Christian university and seminary is now online. They've been, of course, struggling forever and accelerated, like a lot of things, their online presence. There are online colleges all the way up to an MDiv. You can get it online at your pace, in your environment there, sitting at your desk. So we're really good at education. Do not confuse training for leadership development. Here's the big one to hammer, to think about for you in your context, whether it's you and one other staff leader or it's you and 150 staff leaders at your church. When I ask the question, what do you guys do for leadership development? I'll hear things that I would slot right here. We read a book of the month as a staff and discuss it. It's great. We're all going through a course, and they start talking about what they're doing for leadership development. It's training. Don't forget, you should do these things. You should. From an MDiv all the way down to, if you haven't checked out the Bible Project, it's probably some of the best content out there. It is not organized for education, but you can get your MDiv for free if you want through the Bible Project. Or Craig Rochelle books, or Carrie Newhoff, or Rich Birch, or any of the other content providers, old and young among us. Don't forget, education and training does not equal leadership development. It is one of 7 ingredients, though. If I said to you, do you like chocolate cake? And you said, oh yeah, especially it's round and white, especially when I crack it, and I can also have it for breakfast. You're describing an egg, right? It's one of the things that goes into chocolate cake. And there's nothing better than a great chocolate cake. Oh my goodness. But it's not an egg, or it's not flour, or it's not milk, right? It's not just cocoa. These things come together to bake a cake. The 7 things we're talking about today come together. They're always present. If you're doing a 1 year or a 1 summer or a 2-year residency program, these 7, they kind of have to be present at all times. Some are going to take precedence at certain seasons over another one. That's okay. But they're all there all the time. Community, mission, always there. Education is one ingredient. Okay. The second ingredient, spiritual formation. I don't think it's easy, of course. And the disciplers among us, we could debate forever. Is spiritual formation happening, and how to do it? And is it in groups of 10? Is it one-on-one? Is it soul care? I don't know. There's a lot that goes into it. But I would say we have resources forever. We should be pretty good at spiritual formation, even with young 20-somethings. Just pick a resource. The landfills are full of them from last year and years before. There's brand new things all the time. Spiritual formation. I think forever you had to be smart and educated, right? And you had to know the word. You had to know the word and other things. And you had to be a disciple, spiritual formation. You had to be a disciple and love Jesus. If you don't love Jesus and love people and you're a disciple, you probably shouldn't be going into ministry in the first place. But those 2 things were pretty good. We're pretty good at that. or at least we have ample opportunity to be pretty good at that. But we know today it's not enough, is it? It hasn't been enough for a long time. Today is certainly not enough. And the third ingredient we would call soft skills. In our materials, we got a book for the leader. Right after this webinar, I'm hopping on. I'm actually coaching someone. My book is about worn out. And we also have a book for the resident. Same 20 topics written in a resident's voicing versus the coach's voice, right? And it's things that most of us would not get in our education component, nor our spiritual formation component. For example, failing forward, being teachable, time management, communication is what I'm coaching today. Initiative is a huge one. We are always talking about initiative. Being personable. Personableness is one of the 20 core soft skills that we design our curriculum around, because back in the day, we were talking to leaders like you asking, what are you looking for in your next hire? Or why did the last one not work? And we heard over and over these common stories, and we whittled it down. We kept working on it after a series of roundtables, and we came down to 20 topics to complement today's 20 to 25-year-old or 40-year-old second career person, to complement their education and their spiritual formation. Those top three ingredients, I would say, super foundational, maybe the three foundational ingredients. On LinkedIn or any business site, by the way, you can go do a deep dive on soft skills. Seth Godin, even a couple of years ago, who I read every day, I get an email from Seth Godin, and he called them the real skills for today. These are the skills. Every year moving forward, we will be smarter and smarter, and we'll have the tools available. Right before this webinar, I sent Paige on our team. I said, hey, look, I took your Strength Finder, your thinking Genius, whatever that one's called, that just came out that everyone did. Genius, whatever, came out last year, 2 years ago, and your Enneagram. And I dumped it in. I said, hey, what kind of candidate relations? That's her job title here. Here's what a candidate relations person do. Can you write me a one-page summary on this person? And it was amazing. Send it to her. We were blown away. Every year moving forward, the tools at a 22-year-old's hands, every year more and more powerful. What do we need? What is the serious gap in all of us, by the way, but in particular, this age group that's coming into the workforce? A couple months ago on this webinar, Dr. Tim Elmore, the age of authority is dropping. People are smarter and they have the authority to go make this stuff happen. The age of maturity, we could probably argue in general might be rising. And that's why soft skill coaching is so important. Kristen and her coaches on our teams, she would say, your residents, your young leaders' ability to thrive is directly connected to their supervisor's ability to coach them, not to just disciple them, not to just train them, but these core soft skills in this curriculum, these things that we really need, are the things that have to be coached in more than taught. Working Genius. Yes, thank you, Andy. Working Genius, Strength Finders, and her Enneagram. We kind of skimmed the top of all that stuff, and it wrote us a thing. Thank you, Andy Dykhouse. Okay, ingredient number 4, ownership. These next 4 are sort of the things that we ask churches to evaluate themselves on, how they're doing. Because again, we assume education, spiritual formation. So the next 4, when we say ownership, I mean that it's on the supervisor. We would say it's on us. We vet a candidate, the church vets a candidate. We all cry and shake hands and we agree and we assign something. And then she moves in and begins her future successes are not pinned on her. If this is her first role and she's in residency, it's pinned on her supervisor, on her coach. When the offensive line for a football team does not succeed, right? What do they do? What do they do? They fire the coach. They fire the offensive line coach. It's on that person. Those people working together to block. I didn't play football. I know nothing about it. Those people working together to block, to keep the other people from killing the quarterback. Their success is dependent and is pinned on that coach, which is why they fire that coach midseason and replace them, right? We look too much at young people on our team. Let me say something that'll rub the fur the wrong way. We hire people, intern or even full-time or resident. They start with a sprint and they're amazing. They're doing great. And we take our eye off the ball. We stop doing the one-on-ones or the things that we know that we should be doing. And at some point in the first 6 months, we think they're killing it, but they're not. And there's a big fail. We would say after launching 150 of them, when these things go sideways a little bit, it's as much on the boss. In fact, I think I've heard it's the boss most of the time. It's the lack of coaching. It is the lack of ownership. Now, I don't mean enmeshment. For those of you that are super smart and have a counseling degree and you know the tricky words, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about codependence. I'm talking about it in light of a great golf coach, football, a sports coach. When we assume that position with a young leader's life, their development is on us. It's on us is the cliche that we would use right there, okay? We have to own it. We have to look at this at the end of a 2-year residency at Leadership Pathway. The only question is, are they hireable? We keep it down. We don't ask the question, do they love Jesus more? We assume after spending 2 years at a great church of 100 or a great church of 30,000, we assume they love Jesus more. We assume they're smarter, they're more educated, right? We're asking, can they get a job at a local church in America? Either the church where they're doing the residency at, which about 70% of them wind up working there, or up the street or across town or on the other side of the country. Are they hireable? They should be highly desired, by the way. We have 104 weeks when we launch these things. We start with the end in mind. And the end in mind is, are they hireable? Can they do the job? If I have a resident, if they came after my job, what are all the things that they would have to know? I have to own that, keep it in front of us while we're coaching through soft skills. Okay. Number 5, best practices. Best practices. When we think about the end in mind of getting a job, we put 4 columns on the wall and we hand a leader a stack of Post-it notes like this. We're like, okay, worship pastor, church of 1,000. What do you need to know to do your job? Youth pastor, church of 300. What do you need to know to do your job? And it's everything from planning center to sermon preparation, leading a group, leading a kid to Christ, baptism, pastoral duties, learning. I mean, on and on and on. Planning retreats, leadership development. I mean, it just is a massive list and it's intense, which is why we use Post-it notes, because if we talk about the first 6 months, the second 6 months, we draw up the 2 years in quarters. And we start writing skills and we put them in a column, but then we realize, oh, they can't do that yet at that point of the year. They have to do something else and check that off so they can move to the next. So skills and sequence, time moving forward, skills and sequence. They're the best practices of a church. We do not mean your church has the best music. Your church has all the cool moving lights that come through the haze, like the fingers of God through the haze and move out into the crowd and blind us all. I don't know why we do that, but that's cool. We do not mean your youth group is the biggest in town. We do not mean your online presence is the best. What we do mean is, if someone comes and spends 2 years with you in that area of your church, kids, students, worship, production, are they going to learn how to do ministry for today, maybe tomorrow? Or is it 1992? Are you doing missions in a way that a lot of places stop doing missions, for example? That's a great example because it takes it off of music and style and it puts it over on missiology. Is that what they call that? Like, how do we go across town to the bad side of the tracks? How do we minister to people who are not like us? How do we go to Africa? How do we go to an unreached people group, maybe? Do we go in like it's 1950 something? We're still conquering them and asking them to behave like us and come to Jesus like we, or are we doing it the way someone in about year 2002 started telling us how to do these things, right? That's what we mean. Now, very normal for an executive or senior pastor to say to us, we feel great about the kids ministry here. We think, take a look at it. We assess it. It's green and going up, right? But the worship thing, I don't know that we would want a resident over there yet. Give us 2 years. So even within a church, and not a big church, there are areas of ministry that we would say best practices are doing great there. This is a place where a resident could embed. Okay, so best practices, how are we doing? Okay, you with me? You staying with me? We good? Number 6. So education, spiritual formation, soft skills, ownership, best practices, and a mental wellness plan. 7 years ago when we launched Leadership Pathway, we didn't talk about this a lot. And when we did talk about it, we said, you need to be ready because sometimes you have an issue to deal with. And then we all went through COVID and all of the things, right? We've all gotten a lot. One thing COVID did, it not only accelerated mental wellness crisis in our country, but it educated us too, didn't it? Suddenly we got super serious about what to do with young 20-somethings who were either came through high school or college during COVID, right? And during these things that it did a number on us, my dad would say. It did a number on us. You got to have a mental wellness plan. Now, at your church, if your pastor never talks about his or her therapist from the pulpit, if they never talk about their counselor, that's okay. That's okay. If we only talk about these things off platform in the office, counselors, if we only admit that we need that, that's fine, as long as there's a plan, right? Now, if your church believes church leaders shouldn't have counselors, we probably won't work with you. But I don't know that I've heard that in the last 500 churches I've talked to. It's been a while. If your church, if it's normal for someone from the platform to say, I was talking to my therapist this week, and she told me, that's what happened this past Sunday at the church I was at in Salt Lake. Talked openly about his mental wellness and his need for these things and how it's helped shape his life. They probably have a good plan there. You don't have to have a counselor on the staff. You don't have to have a super wired up even partnership with a therapist in town. What you do have to have before you bring someone in their young 20s on your team, what you have to have is the resource and the plan. Who are you going to call if anxiety pops up? 7 years ago, we might have said, you might think about it, because sometimes this happens. And then we started saying, a lot of the time this is happening. And today we would say every time. If you're younger than 26 years old, there's a high probability that you're going to need to address your mental wellness. Now, Steph Rowe, we have great blogs in our blog. There's great resources out there. We love Stephanie Rowe because she keeps one foot in church leadership and one foot in the mental wellness, professional mental wellness world. And she's been a great help to me and great help to many of our people, right? There are lots of things you can address. And we go over, we spend we spend an hour or two on this at our masterclass. All of the things you can look for before you need to go to counseling, like personal rhythms. Are they exercising? Are they eating well? Are they sleeping? Are they always on their phone? How are they doing socially? Do they have friends? Are they in community? Are they showing up late? They were killing it for 60 days, but now they're late to every meeting. They look a little disheveled. He's wearing a trucker hat. She's wearing a trucker hat over and over again. And not the cool, good-looking trucker hat. I mean, the trucker hat you grab as you go out the door because you're late and you didn't shower, right? What are the things? Are we paying attention? Have we learned to pay attention to these things? And I'll tell you, this was big to me a decade or more ago. As we started engaging younger and younger people, I did not grow up this way, right? And if you're if you're 35 and you're a conservative evangelical, right? You probably didn't grow up talking about anxiety, mental wellness, depression, these things. You have to have a plan for this, okay? That ingredient has to be in the mix as much as an egg has to be in the chocolate cake. I'm sorry, you can probably bake a cake without an egg. As flour needs to be in the egg mix or the instant cake mix, right? Okay, you have to have a mental wellness plan. And the final one, number 7. So we said education, spiritual formation, soft skills, ownership, best practices, a mental wellness plan. This thing all hinges on developmental conversations. That's the 7th ingredient. Developmental conversations. What is that? It's coaching. You could say coaching. You have to have a dedicated amount of time where you're going to sit across the table. This sounds so easy until we try to do it. You have to sit across the desk and the table. You have to have half a plan. Our book is probably half a plan. There's some concepts, some digital resources that go with each topic, and then a list of questions that you can ask. And it has to be authentic or they're going to sniff it. They'll sniff it and they'll run if it's not. So all those things about why we get into the business of people stuff to begin with, it has to be true in our life. We have to want more for them than from them. We actually have to love. I know this is, I don't say that sarcastically even. I have to love this person more than the fact that they're the young one on the team. I have to love this person more than I love the output of what they're doing to help me go home extra early one night a week instead of having to stay, right? I was with a young leader 2 weeks ago. I'm like, and he's, it's not doing well. And I'm like, tell me about your one-on-ones with your boss. He's like, I've never had one. He's been there 3.5 years. I'm like, come on, man. When was the last time you were sitting across the table or hanging out? Never. And then he was accused of not being relational, which is, as an outsider listening to that, I was just cracking up. Like there was no sense of ownership with that boss, was there? It makes me want to punch him. No sense of ensuring that this person was successful. And there certainly were no developmental conversations to sit down and ask the great questions that we need to learn how to ask. Coaching is an art, right? You have to do it. You will own, like a lot of things, you will only get good at it at session number 100. I mean, it's like listening, going into it with a clear mind and a clear heart. And all of us are super busy. All of us. When I end this webinar in the 20 minutes, I've got a coaching session with a young leader. And I got up extra early because I knew I would be totally jacked after. I'm always a little jacked up when I'm talking at these webinars, and I know I will be antsy. My heart rate is going to be up when she signs on from Baltimore and we start talking. We're talking today about communication. I opened the book that's laid right there for 5 years and was like, oh yeah, that's right. This is how I'm going to own my own thing before I own hers, because her success is on me. Developmental conversations. Are you having them? Now, I would ask any church leader, and I asked this at the masterclass, we go through these 7 things. I say, okay, leaders, ownership, how are we doing? At your organization, do your supervisors, managers, whatever you're calling them, department heads, do they sense that the people downline of them, their success is on them? Or at those meetings with the door closed, we're always just complaining about how they don't get it. They don't work hard enough. How are we doing? Green, yellow, or red? And which direction is it going? Is it going up or going down? Green, yellow, red, ownership. Best practices. Think about your organization. Think about the leaders in your organization, or think about your own world. Think about your own world. If you took on a resident or a young leader, are they going to learn how to do ministry the way it ought to be done today in your context, in your town? You know, in Salt Lake City this week, I heard story after story. Ministry is very different there compared to Alabama or Kentucky, where I grew up. It's even different compared up here to where I live now in Tacoma, Washington. Best practices for Salt Lake City, a little different. Some of it's very similar looking. The band was great. The moving lights were great. But some of it's very different. Mental wellness. How are we doing at your church on this? How are you doing with a mental wellness plan? Are these things accepted? Do we talk about them? Do you have a resource within reach? If a young leader walked in and needed something immediately that week, how are you doing? Mental wellness plan. And then finally is developmental conversations. Green, yellow, red. Which direction are they going? Typically at a church of any size, smaller than, I'm going to say 5,000. I just made that up. Typically, if there's 40 or 50 people on a team, there's a couple of them that are natural developers. They just do this. They're not let me back up. They're not natural developers because we don't use that language, actually. I always jump on that. They've grown in such a way that they know how to develop people. Their teams are the teams that more and more people want to serve on. And then out of that club, there's some leaders that want to lead. And out of that club, maybe there's some part-time people. And they don't even know how they're doing it, but people want to be around them. They can sit down and have these conversations. How are you doing? Green, yellow, red with developmental conversations. And what direction is it going? We work with churches all the time that don't score very well on any of these. And in fact, that's why they hire us, by the way. So if it's like, well, it's all yellow, it's all heading in the wrong direction, it's all red, or there was only one green out of those 4. And they like that, we work with all sorts of groups like that. So you don't have to be killing it in every way to launch a residency or to take on a young leader or to start an internship or take the internship to the next level. You just have to be aware that these 7 things, if you're not doing them all, you're not developing leaders. When we named Leadership Pathways, kind of fluke. Somebody was on the phone, the state of Nebraska, which is where we are based technically. It's where the checkbook is. And somebody had to pick a name and they didn't pick the name that I wanted. And she chose Leadership Pathway because that's what she could get. And I was like, okay, I don't care. I'm so glad leadership's in the title. Because at the end of the day, when we get deep in the weeds or it gets a little sideways, and most do, if it's going well, there is conflict. If it's going well, there is a little bit of pain that we have to coach through, right? So when it gets that way, I'm always like, hey, just come back to work the process. Are they leading yet? And by leading, I mean, are they motivating 3 or 4 adults to show up with them to park? Is anyone over their shoulder? When you look back, is anyone following, right? Are they doing that yet? We're a year in, we're 6 months in. We try to get there at 90 days. Can they motivate people to show up, serve? We all know, those of you on this call certainly know because you're still doing it. You know how hard it is sometimes to get adults to show up. You have to schedule them, envision them, sit down with them, have coffees and breakfasts and phone calls and text back and forth, and then they decide they're going to serve, and then you have to write them a handwritten note. You have to make sure they serve in a grade. We know how hard that is. That is leadership. And that's what the church needs every day going forward. I heard it this week in Salt Lake, the spiritual awakening going on. I don't know where you live, but I see it every day in my Facebook and social feeds, hundreds of kids being baptized on college campuses. I heard it this week at Salt Lake. It was very different. I was in a room. There were some super old preachers that had been at it 40 years talking about how the young leaders have come to their city. It's a new day. The Spirit of God appears to just be awakening their city to the things of Jesus and the evangelism and the conversions that are going on, the real discipleship. And some of these old guys were like, it's like we've been here for 30 years just plowing fields, and it looks like it's time for the harvest. I hear churches, more and more churches raising money, launching campuses, doing their thing, whatever their thing is. They may not even have a building. They don't want a building. They think buildings are wrong. But when I hear stories, it's like, sounds like the Spirit of God is moving there, and they're trying to keep up with it. And other places need to launch, a campus every year to the year 2030. Or 500 students were baptized on the university campus last week, and it's on my social feed. Guess what all of those towns and cities and places are going to need? Leaders. They're going to need leaders. They're going to need leaders that started in a healthy way, made it through a couple of years of formative leadership development with these 7 ingredients, and then launched full time. And they had their feet under them a little bit more than some of their peers because they had been through this stuff with you, and maybe they'll be leading. If the Spirit of God is moving, and it appears it is, sort of like a retread of the Jesus people thing, after the tumultuous 60s, the Jesus people, if you saw the movie, if you know the history, the reaction of 20 to 25-year-olds to the 60s. We had hippies, we had Woodstock, but we also had Spirit of God alive and work in that generation. It appears as though after a tumultuous decade, we have another one of these going on. All of these people are going to need a leader at a church. And then they're going to need a different kind of leader than my generation, aren't they? And we believe you're the expert to do this. If you're leading in a local church, you can do this. We can help you. We can help you put a little bit of design around how do you deliver these 7 things over the course of a couple of years into the life of a young leader. What we find is it not only helps the young leader, it helps their boss. It helps their manager and their coach grow as well in their leadership. So education, spiritual formation, soft skills, ownership, best practices, a mental wellness plan, and a developmental conversation. These things take time. You're busy. And there's the first tension. Can we clear up? Can we make the time, quiet our hearts, sit down, and have a way to develop this and deliver it back to them? I hope you do. I hope we see you at Recruiter's Edge next week. Come join us in Cincinnati the last week of February. A dozen other leaders in the room for 2 days. Deep dive on this and all sorts of other things and details, big and small. We would love to work with you in any way. And I'll drop show notes later. You'll get them in an email. And thanks for coming today. I really appreciate it. It's great to see each of you here. Blessings.